Robert Wone was a respected attorney, a loyal husband. On August 2, 2006, he stayed overnight at a friend's house in Washington, D.C. By midnight, he was dead, stabbed 3 times in the heart. The 3 men inside the house claimed they heard nothing. The police said the scene was staged, the body decleaned, and nearly 20 years later, so no one has ever been charged with his murder. He was the kind of man who always did the right thing. Robert Eric Wone was born June 1, 1974, in Brooklyn, New York, the first son of Chinese immigrants chasing something better. His parents worked hard, raised him with structure, humility, and high expectations, and Robert, he met every single one of them. On a roll, respectful, never late, never reckless. The kind of child who made teachers proud and grandparents tear up during graduation speeches. By the time he was in high school, Robert's path was already visible, not because it was forced, but because it felt so natural. He was smart, not just academically but quietly wise. He read everything, he asked thoughtful questions, and he had a way of making people feel heard. At the College of William and Mary, Robert shined. He majored in public policy, got involved in student government, became known as a natural leader, someone who wasn't in it for attention, but for purpose. It's where he met his future wife, Kathy, and it's where he forged one of the most important friendships of his life, with a young man named Joseph Price. They were both driven, both brilliant, both part of a close-knit Asian American community. They stayed in touch through law school and beyond. Robert went on to law school at the University of Pennsylvania, graduating with distinction. He became a practicing attorney. In D.C., focused on civil rights and public service. Eventually, he landed a position as general counsel for Radio Free Asia, a job that fused his legal skills with his commitment to justice and freedom of information. In 2003, he married Kathy. Their love wasn't flashy. It was built on trust, shared goals, and deep companionship. They settled in Fairfax County, Virginia, a modest, quiet life full of books, church, and dinners with close friends. They were trying to start a family. Everything in Robert's life made sense. On August 2, 2006, Robert had a long day at work. He was scheduled to attend a CLE, continuing legal education seminar, the following morning in Washington, D.C., and rather than make the late-night commute back to Virginia, he accepted an offer to crash at a friend's townhouse near DuPont Circle. The friend, Joseph Price, the same Joseph he'd known since college, now a successful attorney and partner at a high-profile law firm. Joseph lived in a 3-story townhouse at 1509 Swan Street, NW, a beautiful historic row home nestled in one of the city's most charming, gentrified neighborhoods. He lived there with his domestic partner, Victor Zaborski, and their 3rd housemate, Dylan Ward. Their household was unconventional. Joseph and Victor were a long-time couple raising children. Dylan, younger and quieter, was a former literature major turned massage therapist and part of what they reportedly called a polyamorous relationship. But to Robert, it didn't matter. They were his friends. He trusted them. So that night, after finishing work, Robert headed over with a small overnight bag and his typical calm energy. The plan was simple: catch up, sleep in the guest room, and head to his conference the next morning. He arrived around 10:30 p.m. By 11:49 p.m., Victor Zaborski was on the phone with 911. His voice was shaking. We think he's been stabbed. Our friend, he's not breathing." The 911 call came in at 11:49 p.m., August 2, 2006. The dispatcher picked up. A man on the other end, Victor Zaborski, was nearly incoherent, his voice panicked but somehow contained, like someone trying to sound distraught through clenched teeth. "Our friend's been stabbed. He's on the floor." The operator asked for the address. 1509 Swan Street. Please hurry, please. Within 5 minutes, paramedics arrived at the elegant 3-story townhouse in DuPont Circle. a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood that had long since priced out drama. But the house was different tonight. The porch light was on, the front door stood slightly ajar, and inside was a silence that made even the EMTs hesitate. What they found was strange. Robert Wone was lying on his back on a fold-out sleeper sofa in the second-floor guest room. He was barefoot, still dressed in his work clothes, dark pants, a white undershirt. He looked peaceful at first glance. There was almost no blood, no evidence of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no signs of forced entry. But when they looked closer, they found 3 precise stab wounds, clean, vertical, clustered tightly together near his heart. It was surgical. The paramedics immediately started CPR. He was not breathing, his pulse was gone. They worked feverishly, pushing air into lungs that would not respond, trying to revive a man whose body was still warm, but whose spirit had already left the room. In the hallway, Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward stood in loose bathrobes, arms crossed or hands trembling. They said they'd heard nothing, not the stabbing, not a struggle, not even Robert falling, just a faint noise, a chime, they said, like the alarm system pinging when a door opened. They told police they believed an intruder had entered. The house through the back door, stabbed Robert, and fled without anyone seeing or hearing a thing. They said they'd been upstairs in their separate bedrooms, showering, watching TV, reading. Nothing added up. The back door, the supposed entry point, was closed. There were no muddy footprints, no signs of forced entry, no foreign DNA. The knife found on the nightstand beside Robert's body looked too clean. Forensics would later determine it had been wiped down, and may not have even been the real murder weapon. There were other oddities. Robert's body had been cleaned. Detectives noticed his wounds weren't oozing, and his torso appeared wiped, as if someone had washed him post-mortem. There was no blood trail, no spatter, no drag marks. Just a small pool beneath him, like someone had staged the scene. The 3 men had showered. All 3 appeared clean and freshly groomed. One had damp hair. One was still in his robe. Why would 3 people shower after their friend was stabbed? The detective on scene, Detective Diane Durham, immediately felt something was off. This didn't feel like a break-in. It felt like a cover-up. Within hours, all 3 men, Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward, were brought to Washington, D.C. Metro Police Headquarters for questioning. It wasn't just standard protocol. It was instinct. The detectives had walked into the Swan Street home and felt it, the strangeness of it, the unnatural calm, the pristine room, the body that looked placed, and 3 educated men with no visible panic, offering a version of events that sounded like it had been rehearsed between the 911 call and the knock on the door, in separate rooms. The interviews began. Victor Zaborski, corporate PR manager, emotionally frayed, the one who called 911, was visibly distressed. He cried, rubbed his eyes, said he was shocked, that Robert had been their friend, that they couldn't believe this had happened. We were upstairs. Joseph was showering. Dylan was in his room. I was reading. We heard the chime go off. We came down and saw him there. He kept emphasizing the chime, the home's alarm system, which beeped when doors opened. But when police asked which door, he wasn't sure. The back? The kitchen? He didn't know. Dylan Ward, more reserved, gave the shortest statement. He said he'd been in his room, reading a book. He heard voices, some movement, didn't come out until the others called for him. He described the scene robotically. No emotion, no speculation. When detectives asked about the knife beside the body, he said it looked like one from the kitchen. But further analysis would show that the knife found on the nightstand didn't match the knife block in the house. It had no traces of blood in the grooves, unusual for a weapon that had just been used to stab a man 3 times in the chest. Then came Joseph Price, the homeowner, the longtime friend. The man who invited Robert to stay over that night. He was confident, polished, precise. He reiterated what the others had said. They were upstairs, didn't hear anything, heard the chime, came down and found Robert bleeding out. But as detectives, pushed him, gently at first, then more firmly, his answers started to contradict his housemates. Victor said Joseph was in the shower when they heard the chime. Joseph said he had already finished showering and was drying off. Small discrepancies, but for detectives in a murder case, small things matter. Then came the question no one wanted to ask. Did Robert have any enemies? Was he depressed? Is there any reason he'd hurt himself? All three men said no. They described Robert as smart, moral, stable, a man of faith, a loyal husband. Someone who would never do drugs, never get involved in anything risky, and certainly wouldn't walk into danger voluntarily. So the only possibility, they all insisted, was an intruder. But there were problems. Nothing was stolen. No one saw anyone flee. The doors had no forced entry, and the timeline didn't work. Paramedics estimated Robert had been dead for at least 30 minutes by the time they arrived. That would place his time of death at around 11:15 p.m., but the 911 call didn't come in until 11:49 p.m. That's 34 minutes of silence. What were they doing in that time? If the men weren't going to talk, the evidence might. Over the next several weeks, forensic teams combed through the Swan Street townhouse, collecting everything: bedding, electronics, clothing, knives, drains, towels, and most crucially, Robert Wone's body, and what they found made things even darker. The autopsy findings, the cleanest murder crime scene. They'd seen Robert had 3 clean, deep stab wounds, all in the chest, all in a tight triangular cluster. There were no defensive wounds. No bruising on his arms or hands. His body had no other injuries, no blunt force trauma, no visible restraint marks. Except one medical examiner noticed small red pinpoint marks on Robert's ankle, chest and hand, injection sites. But toxicology came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol, no foreign substances in his system. Still, something felt wrong. So they looked deeper. No blood, but he'd been stabbed in the heart. The stab wounds should have produced significant blood spatter, especially with the heart still pumping, but there was almost none. Not on the walls, not on the mattress, not even on Robert's clothing. That's when the theory shifted. Was Robert killed somewhere else in the house, then moved to the bed, or worse? Was he restrained, sedated, then stabbed by someone while he was paralyzed? Sexual assault speculation. The coroner also found signs consistent with sexual assault, though not definitive. There was rectal bruising, possible signs of penetration or trauma, but there was no semen, no tears in his clothing. And again, no defensive injuries. It was like Robert had not moved, not even flinched, during his murder. That pointed to one possibility: he was chemically immobilized. The room was too perfect. The guest room bedding had no creases, no pressure, indentations where someone might have sat. The white comforter was pristine, except for one small bloodstain under Robert's body. It looked less like a murder scene and more like a crime movie set. The detectives came to believe the entire second floor had been cleaned, meticulously, fastidiously, before the 911 call was placed. And that 34-minute window, they think that's when the cleanup happened. The prosecution's theory, though never proven, was this: Robert Wone was injected with a paralytic agent. He was possibly sexually assaulted, or experimented on, by one or more of the men in the house. Then when something went wrong, he was stabbed. His body was cleaned, redressed, and placed on the sofa bed. The scene was staged to look like a sudden, random attack, and only then was 911 called. But with no eyewitnesses, no clear murder weapon, and the unwavering silence of all three men, prosecutors had no choice but to charge them not with murder, but with obstruction of justice conspiracy, tampering with evidence, because while they couldn't prove who killed Robert Wone, they were certain they knew. It took nearly 3 years to bring the case to court, not as a murder trial, but as a battle over truth, tampering, and silence. On June 1st, 2010, just shy of what would have been Robert Wone's 36th birthday, the trial of Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward began in Washington, D.C. Superior Court. They stood accused not of killing their friend, but of obstructing justice, conspiracy, and evidence, tampering in the aftermath of his death. The full charges were surgical, much like the crime, because that was all the prosecutors had left. Lead prosecutor Glenn Kirshner didn't need to prove who killed Robert. He needed to prove that the 3 men acted together to conceal whatever had happened that night, and so he turned to the details, the 34-minute gap between the estimated time of death and the 911 call, the lack of blood in a murder that pierced the heart. The cleaned body, the washed towels, the wiped knife, the suspiciously calm behavior of 3 educated men, the injection marks, never explained, and the impossibility of an unknown intruder entering a secure townhouse, stabbing a man silently in a room full of people, and vanishing without a trace. They didn't need to kill him to be guilty, Kirshner told the court. They only needed to help cover it up. Defense attorneys painted the 3 men as sophisticated, respectable, and victims of homophobic bias. They said the intruder theory was viable. Police had tunnel vision. The men had no motive. They loved Robert. The lack of physical evidence meant nothing could be proven. They attacked the forensic science. They argued that the injection marks were bug bites, that the cleanup theory was speculation, that the men's calm behavior wasn't guilt, it was shock. Their central claim, we didn't kill him, we didn't cover it up, we were just home, when a nightmare happened. On June 29, 2010, Judge Lynn Leibovitz delivered a not guilty verdict on all charges, but she wasn't kind. She said it was likely the men did know who killed Robert Wone. She said she believed there had been a cover-up, but she couldn't convict them on the absence of direct proof. No fingerprints, no witness, no murder weapon, just a perfect crime that looked too clean to be random and too quiet to be explained. In the end, no one was ever charged with Robert Wone's murder. To this day, the case remains officially unsolved. After the verdict, there was no celebration, no press conference, no declaration of justice done, just silence. The kind that felt like grief, like failure, like watching something rot in real time. Kathy Wone sat in the courtroom, her face unreadable. She hadn't missed a single hearing. She'd listened to every second of testimony, every question that ended in a shrug, every answer that felt like a carefully polished lie. She had married a man who built his life on truth, and now she had to watch that truth vanish beneath legal technicalities. Her husband had died in a house full of people who claimed to love him, and yet no one could, or would, say what happened. Robert's family buried him in Virginia. The funeral was packed with friends, colleagues, and former classmates. They spoke of him with reverence, his humility, his generosity, his sense of duty. But no one could speak of closure, because there was none. A brilliant man had been murdered with precision, then washed, laid out, and surrounded by silence. What do you say about that? In 2011, Kathy Wone filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Joseph Price, Victor Zaborski, and Dylan Ward. The suit alleged that one or more of them had either killed Robert or helped conceal the truth of what had been done to him. Unlike the criminal trial, a civil case doesn't require proof beyond a reasonable doubt, just a preponderance of evidence, enough to convince a judge or jury that someone, somewhere, knew more than they claimed. The case didn't go to trial. It was quietly settled in August 2011 for an undisclosed amount. The terms were sealed. There were no apologies, no admissions, just signatures and the closing of another door in a case built on locked rooms and withheld answers. The townhouse on Swan Street was sold. The three men moved away, changed jobs, faded from the spotlight. Joseph Price's law. Career collapsed. Dylan Ward attempted to restart his life in Florida. Victor, the man who had made the 911 call, retreated from public view entirely. But the case never really went away. Online sleuths still comb through the crime scene photos, the interrogation footage, the autopsy details. Forums light up every few years with a new theory. Podcasts revisit the night Robert died. People want answers, not just because the murder was brutal, but because it was so controlled, so surgically cold, so unlike the chaos that usually defines sudden death. Robert Wone was not a man who lived dangerously. He didn't take risks. He didn't surround himself with unstable people. He was careful, grounded, trustworthy. And yet something happened in that house, something so disturbing that three grown men, all of them educated, composed, and successful, decided that saying nothing was better than telling the truth. Was it out of loyalty? Was it fear? Or was it because they believed they could get away with it? They were right. The questions still echo. What was injected into Robert's body? Why were there no drugs found? Who cleaned him up? Why were the towels washed? Why did the guest room look staged? Why didn't anyone call 911 sooner? But the biggest question of all is the one that will likely never be answered. Why would someone kill Robert Wone? There was no robbery, no scandal, no feud, just a man visiting old friends, trusting the wrong ones, and ending up dead on a sofa. In the middle of the night. Some say it was a sex game gone wrong. Some say it was premeditated. Others believe it was an accidental death that turned into a desperate cover-up. But every version leads to the same place. A brutal murder, a house full of secrets, and a justice system unable to penetrate the calm, confident silence of three men who never cracked. And so the case remains open. Not cold, not forgotten, just open. Waiting for someone to finally say what happened in that house on Swan Street. Until then, the silence will remain, louder than anything else. In the years that followed, Kathy Wone continued her life with dignity, but there was no such thing as moving on. There was only movement, through time, through grief, through a world that kept turning, despite the fact that her husband had been taken in a way that defied explanation. She became an advocate for victims' rights. Not the kind with press tours or microphones, but the kind who sits quietly with other families who have lost someone and simply listens, because she knows what silence sounds like when it becomes permanent. Friends say she never expressed hatred for the men in that house, just disappointment, not only in them, but in the entire system that allowed it to end this way. The law, after all, is built on facts. But what happens when the facts are carefully removed, cleaned, and dressed up to look like nothing happened? Every now and then, someone will mention Robert Wone on a podcast or in an article, a footnote in a list of unsolved murders. But to those who knew him, he was never a footnote. He was a son, a husband, a lawyer, a churchgoer, a man who stayed late at work because he believed in what he did, a man who offered kindness by default, not calculation. A man who by every account deserved none of what happened to him. Sometimes the most terrifying crimes aren't the ones that erupt in rage, but the ones that unfold behind closed doors in a whisper. The kind where you're not even sure if it happened, until you realize the silence is the loudest part. Robert's death didn't just rob a life, it corrupted trust. Trust in friends. Trust in the idea that safety can be found in familiar places. Trust in a system that claims to value truth. Every locked room mystery holds an element of fiction, something cinematic in the way it defies logic. But Robert's case wasn't fiction. It was very real, very precise, and very unresolved. The townhouse still stands on Swan Street. It's been remodeled, repainted. The inside has changed, new owners unaware of the secrets soaked into its walls. People walk past it every day, joggers, tourists, delivery drivers, none of them knowing that a man died there under the most chilling circumstances imaginable, and that no one has ever truly answered for it. In the end, Robert Wone's story is not just a murder mystery, it is a warning that darkness wears many faces, that silence is a weapon, and that even in the safest-looking rooms, behind the smartest-looking smiles, evil can slip in and sit down like it belongs there, and sometimes it never leaves. What remains of Robert Wone's story is not measured in headlines or court rulings. It exists in the tension that rises when someone mentions his name, in the discomfort of the unexplained, the unresolved, the unconfessed. It lives in the breath that catches in a detective's throat when asked what case still haunts them, in the way investigators who worked that scene will pause before answering, as if the words are still trying to form themselves into meaning. Because how do you explain what happened? How do you make sense of three educated men who lawyered up within hours, offered near-identical statements, and then never spoke again? Not in press interviews, not on the witness stand, not even years later. Together, they formed an impenetrable wall, not of alibis, but of omissions. They didn't need to lie, they just had to not tell. And in doing so, they showed exactly how powerful silence can be. And that silence changed things. It changed how the DC legal community saw itself, how the public saw the courts, the justice system, even the value of forensics. It made prosecutors doubt the weight of their own evidence. It forced journalists into speculative gymnastics. It humiliated a police department that had otherwise cracked harder cases with less to work with. And yet, the people who knew Robert never lost sight of who he was. They still talk about his laugh, sharp, sudden, the kind that filled up a room and made people lean in to catch the joke. About his long emails, always thoughtful, always ending with a kind word. About the way he remembered birthdays, even the ones that didn't seem important. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't chasing power or praise. He was someone who simply showed up for friends, for colleagues, for the quiet causes that mattered. He showed up that night too, at the home of a friend he'd known since college. A home where he believed he would be safe. A home where he brought only a change of clothes, a toothbrush and trust. And he never left it alive. His legacy, though invisible to headlines now, endures in the questions we still ask, about what truth really means when no one's required to speak it, and about how even in a room full of friends, you can be completely alone. What happened to Robert Wone didn't just take one life. It revealed a terrifying possibility that some people are willing to carry a secret to the grave, even if it's not their own. And the most chilling part? They already did.